Jim.
Claude.
What is it?
Snow. January 14th and finally.
Finally.
Yeah.
Well, we've got some things to finish from last month with snow.
We did have snow.
Gifford Woods.
Yeah, we had to go up and find it. Yeah.
And we really got into trees there.
We did get into
We
trees.
got into trees big time.
You'll find out what that means.
You'll see.
Yeah.
Keep watching.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk today about some pruning.
Put your earplugs on so you can't hear that traffic, but you're sitting in a stand that basically were seedlings 400 years ago or 350 years ago, and at that time there were 350-year-old trees growing over the top of them. But it's a characteristic of what this landscape looked like when the first settlers arrived. If you're wandering around in a woodlot and you're examining trees and you're trying to decide relative age, if you examine any of these big ones, and by big we'll say, because I did bring a diameter tape, we'll say for argument's sake, this will be a big tree, okay, right here. Because I haven't measured one of these in quite a while. What's our diameter?
34.
You're very good. 33.4 inches.
Throw the tape away.
That's right. These are examples. Okay. Now, granted, a 100-year-old sugar bush will have large trees in it, but using this one as an example, and it's, as Jim said, 33 inches in diameter, a healthy sugar bush, the larger trees, even if they're that size, will be missing one of the 7 characteristics of old growth. That tree right there has 6 of the 7 characteristics that identify it as a multi-century old tree. So, from your vast experience, what would you say their characteristics are that say that that's a several century old tree?
I know one.
All right.
It's big. No.
It's large.
Large.
Yes, okay.
Its form is, it's not an open grown tree, it's a forest grown tree.
Okay, in general, there's a long, invariably there are long clear stumps, or long clear trunks. That's a misstatement.
It had to fight.
Usually 50 feet to the first branch or so it'll have a long clear trunk, and it's basically for centuries of fighting for sunlight. The lower branches have shed off, and if you look around, there are none here that have lower branches at all. And that 50-foot rule here is pretty good because there's nothing before that, okay?
I'll guess it's something else. Maybe getting somewhat of like a gnarled look in the top?
Yes, very good. Yeah. Typically they're flattened even, and usually have large dead branches protruding. So there's some evidence of a decline in overall health. And usually, and looking through here, the very biggest ones are hopefully a little healthier than this top, but basically they'll show a flattened top with large dead branches protruding, and it's a sign of basically it being in its declining years. Okay, there's
And
2.
The real thick, heavy bark.
Yeah, exactly. Indiana bat bark, I like to refer to it, but that's not a fair.
One of the other things, Gary, is the amount of large dead stuff on the ground.
Well, that's a characteristic of the site itself. We'll get to that in a few minutes.
Okay.
But the tree itself will have large furrowed bark, exactly. Okay, that's 3.
Species. It's a tree that has the ability to live a long time.
Yes.
Does that
And it's
count?
usually one of, usually in a northern hardwood site, that's going to be one of 4 species. Sugar maple, hemlock beech, or the occasional yellow birch. So, okay.
How many we got? 4? We
Yeah,
need
I'll
7?
give him credit for that, but we'll have to add one. Right. Yep.
Give us a hint.
General shape of the tree itself is also another indicator.
Oh, no taper.
No taper, and they tend to be asymmetrical. They don't have that lollipop or Tootsie Roll pop where it's perfectly uniform. Something has happened usually over time to alter the the round shape of the tree. Usually it's a part of the crown falling off, but you don't find perfectly rounded trees, okay? All right?
Shut the camera off and then tell us how it gives a hint for this.
Well, next one is down, actually.
Oh.
This you take for granted, but
looking into the root section, seeing some hollow, some...
No, just the flare itself,
Big
the
flare.
root flare.
Big root flare.
The
To support
physical requirements to hold a tree up this size usually will have, first of all, a very expansive root system, but it's exhibited most often by this huge root flare. So those are fun to sit in during deer season because you just sort of, it's like in an armchair. So the root flares are obvious with very large trees and very old ones because the root system is always getting larger at the bottom. So you have that root flare created, okay? There's two more, only one of which is obvious. And it's most obvious there's one right over there that's got the characteristic of it.
Over
About
which one?
50 feet.
hole?
Just beyond that, yes, exactly.
Oh.
Evidence of decay. Heartwood decay. Decayed. Okay, there are very few. There's a debate here, but I have serious doubts, assuming that this wasn't described as a natural area. Well, you've cut trees before. If you looked at these from their timber potential, I guess you would automatically deduct a lot of volume out of it because they just don't have that healthy, vigorous sugar maple tight bark look to them. They certainly have the size here that would attract your eye initially, but every one of them will have, when you look at the dead tops, invariably you'll find a crack or some sort of decay column in most of these big ones. And the one that's least obvious and not apparent on every tree is that a lot of them, for whatever reason, I haven't yet figured out or been told why, oftentimes they'll have a twist, a spiral seam in them.
Okay.
Again, it's from probably centuries of physiologically responding to stresses, and eventually they'll crack in places, but they'll develop a twist or a seam.
One thought I might have is that if a tree has disappeared, died in one spot, then the trees would tend to develop their crown slightly more in that direction.
Exactly.
But in 50 years, then one goes on the other side and it could reverse. I wonder if that could do anything.
If they can respond to the light over time, okay? We're looking at, and one of the questions that always arises, because the assumption is that we've cut all the others, had we not developed Vermont the way we have historically and put 500,000 people here and all the farmland and all those things. I mean, Vermont is back to 80% forest again. The odds are we would still not be the proud owners of any great acreage of old growth. Okay, so we can't blame it on our own necessity to clear this state once for sheep and people. There are other factors at work here that prevent most stands from getting much beyond 200 years old. All right, and it's apparent in the Adirondacks. It wasn't apparent here for a long time. He's been here longer than I am, so he would have noticed the change.
I remember when these were sapling.
But I went a long time in this area of Vermont before we saw any sort of catastrophic event that wiped out trees on any large scale. And you don't think about that until you see it happen. But
a natural event, a storm, not a disease.
Storm. It's apt to be a storm. Exactly. I mean, you were mentioning earlier.
Slightly.
We've done a good job with the disease end. I mean, we've wiped out chestnut, American elm. We're in the process of removing butternut. We've done a pretty good job on beech. All those, ironically, are introduced pathogens, but just the same, we've managed to do that. The factor in New England usually that causes some sort of catastrophic change is wind. And the 38 hurricane was the marker before, but I was here 12 or 15 years before 1,000 acres in Rochester went down in one night with the Forest Service. And then the famous storm of October of '87 down in Bennington snapped off lots of places. And sometimes everything comes down, sometimes parts of things snap off. But in the last 4 years, we've had a microburst that wandered from from the St. Lawrence River all the way across. So there are always periodic things in the ice storm of '98.
We had a microburst in July.
Which wasn't far from here. If you go to 1,700 feet here, you'd find some serious ice damage on these east-facing slopes from that storm. So bottom line is, you're right, sheltered. We're in a cove. We've got the whole ridge line that's protecting prevailing westerlies, which is the main way, but there's some protection coming this way too. So the trees that we see on the ground here were probably our individual natural decline, death, snap off sort of processes rather than any sort of
And we see a lot of those.
catastrophic. There's a lot here.
A
Okay?
lot of big trees on the ground.
Right. That's, again, a characteristic of an old-growth forest. So we've looked at the 7 characteristics minus the twist, which you can't really see. There's about a dozen characteristics when you look at the fact that you've identified multi-century trees here. There are 11 other characteristics of a site like this that, if you have most of them, you'd say, aha, this is an old stand. One of them is LWDs, large woody debris, or a lot of wood on the ground. And if you're used to either logging or working in managed stands or second growth stands like most of us are, you forget about the fact that you don't walk over stuff like that very often.
Behind you there.
I know. It's all over the place.
Recent, too.
It's amazing. So, yeah, and it's even worse out west because the stuff that's on the ground is 6 or 8 feet in diameter. And I can remember being on forest fires in Washington and Oregon where, yeah, it doesn't rot as fast out there, okay? But one of the characteristics that becomes obvious is there's a lot of large woody debris in the ground. The other characteristic is that there's often a lot of large woody debris still standing. An old growth stand in Snag City, there's stuff all over the place. And it's, again, a wide variety of sizes. This is well on its way to becoming a snag. I mean, it's, well, it's still got a half a crown, but not much more than that. We may want to move out of the way of that one. Most of these others have the dead branch approach, but they're on the way out. And we looked at a few on up by the road that had snapped off entirely. So there are standing dead trees and snags and a lot of large woody debris. We're also standing in another characteristic, which is generally if they snap off or if they blow over, they've got this hill and hummock sort of scenario. So there's always this undulation, and the glacier didn't create it. It's centuries of disturbance only by the fact that a tree blew over. And I haven't got any recent uprootings here. There's one right down at the far end that's been up in the last 2 or 3 years. I see them quite often in the Adirondacks. And I mean, you can do a whole study on what happens in an undisturbed site with an uprooted tree, because in the Adirondacks, that's the exposed soil that'll get a paper birch started. So you'll have a root ball that's 20 feet in the air, and there's the whole row of paper birch all on that little root ball. But the other thing that you'll find is a large number of lichens and mosses. Most of it will be on down material, but because of the slowness of the growth of the old ones declining, you'll find larger than normal populations of lichen mosses even on the barks of the trees themselves. Okay, we mentioned briefly different age groups present at all times.
Why is this here? I mean, how long has Route 100 been? And that must be.
Well, 100's been here for a while. Kent Pond probably was just ordinary old Vermont swampland until Fish and Wildlife bought it and dammed it.
Oh, it wasn't a mill pond or anything?
I don't believe so. No. That's a great question. You've got to ask that question why, because well, the reason why.
We're not on top of a mountain anyway.
No, the reason why, short of the threat of timber trespass, is that it's been in an ownership that apparently the landowners at any given time never were interested in harvesting trees. Because the first characteristic that most of us forget all about is determining any sort of lack of human disturbance. And the most obvious one is stumps. And you can't remember the last time any of us have been in a woodlot where there weren't stumps around. But
and these maple,
until you suddenly miss that, you sort of take it for granted, but there are no stumps on this 8 acres.
for as accessible as these are.
That's right.
And also, though, have they been tapped?
That's the question nobody's quite sure of. Again, one of the definitions that gets bannered about with this lack of human disturbance influence is degree of disturbance. So I would not rule out that some of these haven't been tapped, but again, they had little influence, direct influence on the health and vigor of the tree, and the evidence has long since been healed up, because we know they haven't been tapped in a couple of generations, because the Kent family owned these for a long time, and we've got still oral histories from the son of the owner that owned the land that gave it to the park, John Barrows, and he can remember as a boy, you know, the use of this land, and he can't remember anything related to sugaring. And John is now in his 70s. Watch, he'll come back and haunt me with that, but he's close to 70 anyway. So the only reason it hasn't been is that there was an ownership pattern that said, you know, we're not interested in selling the trees, which is interesting because that's unusual for Vermont, to say the least.
But that's really only a short period of time when we're talking about the age of these trees.
That's right, exactly, yeah. That's a century.
They were old when
they were a century, yeah.
Yeah, they were old.
And certainly they were attractive at some time.
That's right. They were attractive 100 years ago.
Yeah, they were probably more attractive 100 years ago than they are right now.
Definitely, yeah.
Exactly. So,
Well, this being a unique area, but like I say, very small and very close to modern transportation thing, how is wildlife? What advantages or disadvantages is this for wildlife, or is it just too small an area to make any difference?
it's too small an area. It's that element of this stand that's probably most impacted by its fragmentation. Okay, we've got 7 acres here. It's not large enough for it to support the wildlife species that 1,000 acres would, for example, that would be more characteristic of using old growth plants and habitats like this. So this is the aspect of this site that probably is, well, no doubt about it, that's most greatly impacted. So if there are in fact species that are, quote, dependent on old growth stands, this isn't going to help them at all. No, I mean, we've got Route 100, which is a physical barrier to any small critters. We've got Kent Pond on this side. We've got a fishing access road on that side, and as of now, we have a house right over there. I can see it from here, 200 feet away. That's right on the property line. So this is about as good a classic case of a fragmented resource as you'll come across.
But it's all we got.
It's all we got, exactly. So the studies here, you won't find research studies studying the what's expected to be the natural animal populations in an old growth stand here. They're the ones most obviously impacted because it's just too small an area.
Nope.
Just based on the sheer size of the diameter in relationship to the overall crown size, that's probably one of the 3 or 4 most dominant trees in this whole 5-acre piece. But it still carries the characteristics. There's a hole at 40 feet I can see. You can see the root flare. If you look at the bark pattern, even though it may not be very far in, that is also showing
a lot of bats,
a bark twist. Okay, huge crown, but there is some dead stuff in there. It is surprisingly symmetrical, so it's been a dominant tree for quite a while.
But that influence is roughly a 16th of an acre.
Oh, sure. Yes, that's taking its portion of resources for its own needs, for sure, because
It shows there's nothing around it.
Yeah, while it hasn't directly killed these 2 on the ground, it certainly had an impact. And then
certainly benefited from them leaving, too.
Well, yeah, it's true, too, because it's going to benefit more in a few years, because this huge one to the right of it has lost most of its crown. And then just looking around here, there are a couple others that are going to join it. There's a 14-incher right there that has very little crown. The top is partly snapped off, and there's one behind it that's about the same size with not much crown in it. So had the ice storm in January of '98 come to this low an elevation,
A lot of stuff.
we'd added to the snag category here considerably, because some of these are just going to succumb to a heavy wet snow or another ice storm, because they're carrying a lot of dead wood in them. But
These remind me of the law of gravity, Gary.
Oh, really?
What goes up must come down.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah? Isn't that one of the laws, 7 laws?
It
Do you know
must
what
be,
the
exactly.
7 laws of gravity are?
No, but I'll bet it's all relating
well,
to...
you got...
One of them, I hope, is that the closer to the ground that you are, the less distance you have to fall, unless it hurts.
That's rule number
It's one of the
4.
one of the reasons I've always tried to stay somewhere near the ground.
Me too, yeah.
Okay.
Me too.
All right. Let's go look at that little canopy gap we've got over the hill here. Because you're freezing to death.
There's just an unbelievable amount of trees that are just going over.
Several points to point out here. One is an ancient wildlife principle that the size of the cavity determines the size of the critter that's going to hibernate in it. And one of the things you don't find...
3 critters in this one.
Yes, you rarely find bears hibernating, for example, in young stands. But in large woody debris stands, they can... well, we've pulled them out of big yellowbird standing and behind Stratton, and certainly downed ones they would certainly have the opportunity to do. But large dead trees have value for larger species of wildlife, and it works out well. The other example to point out here is that this, in fact, is why many of the trees eventually fall on the ground. Maple is susceptible to heart rots, which means that the heartwood or the non-living wood will slowly decay over time. And this stood until it almost all decayed, and then it couldn't hold itself up anymore, and it landed behind us. But it would have been interesting to be here when it did. But it's certainly a large enough hole here for several of us to live. I haven't done this since the state pine tree went down. What's interesting also is what it took with it when it went down, because it snapped the top completely out of a 20-inch maple and about a 16-inch maple.
Finish them off.
Right.
They're done for.
And the rest of the tree lays right down there in that opening. Species different, but it has all the characteristics. Okay? Beautiful spiral seam, obvious evidences of decay, very fluted root system, huge platy bark, broken top, large dead branches.
Species.
And a possibility of being the oldest tree here.
Yeah. This was the photo that the Herald used several years ago, and he qualified himself by saying some dating back 400 years. There is a hemlock that they've dated, and I don't know which one, but it was in the 400-year range. But it has to be, there are only a handful here, so.
Because being hemlock, that could have stood for 20 years at 4-foot height.
Oh, exactly,
Yeah.
easily. I've got a fellow brought me a beam in September for the fair, Dr. Freeman from Castleton. He has a friend that lives in one of the older houses in Castleton, and the guy was redoing his floor beams underneath the original floor, so they cut one of the pieces out and made a cookie out of it, and it still showed the hewn and the outer bark of some of those. He knows the year that the house was built, 1848. He knows the number of rings in that portion from the outer bark to the center was 200 and some. We're back into like 1515 with that evidence of beam and the 258 years it grew. But you need a hand lens or a microscope to count those rings, because the beam itself isn't the portion of it from the center out isn't 10 inches in diameter.
And what kind?
It's hemlock.
That was hemlock, too.
Yeah, exactly.
Because one of the cookies you have.
They sit there microscopically.
120 years.
Yeah. I've been looking for a cookie now.
1776.
Right, I've got a bunch of them that I've been collecting just to tell stories with for kids. So I have an open invitation. Bring me your oldest cookie. The oldest cookie anybody's found me is a hemlock, and it's 158 years old. It's that big around.
There's a grocery
And John
store.
Bowden found it over in whatever that county is over there.
What do you want? You want one all
I want to
finished?
find a 200-year-old tree is what I want to find.
Give me money.
I have not seen one
Show
yet.
me the money.
And we're going back to the fact that, in the 1840s we were growing sheep here instead of trees. But I have not found a
You come to
200-year-old
my
cookie yet.
office.
Okay.
Well, I got
Well, how
one.
have I missed it all that time then? All right.
It's right on my shelf.
Okay.
17.
200
It was cut in 1996, and there's 200 rings there. So it's
And what species is it?
It's a hemlock.
Okay,
Yeah.
same thing. Yes. Yep.
Well, it's
Yep.
about time for us to wrap up the show, Gary.
All
I
right.
want to say one thing, that it's nice that these people changed the name of the town, if that's what they want to do.
Yes.
But if they want to come to Bennington County and make another change, that'd really be a step up for them. And we let this acreage qualify, wouldn't we, Claude? That'd be a nice thing to add to our county.
Yes.
Bring this to
I don't know if
Bennington
we want the whole town.
Yeah, okay.
We could take 7 acres. Though.
7 acres, all right.
Okay.
Yep. You just can't disturb it on the way down.
No.
But it'll work.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks for entertaining us.
You're welcome. It's a fun afternoon here.
Kill me,
Yes.
And we're going to head back over the mountain where there's no snow.
That's right. We're going to
Warmer
plant our garden.
temperatures. Yep. And we're headed down south, the Banana Belt.
Thanks,
Good.
Well,
Hi, I'm Bruin the Bear, and I'm here to see Dr. Fox.
Well, I'm Dr. Fox.
You're Dr. Fox? You sure don't look like a fox.
Well, I've been a fox all my life. Not all foxes look alike, you know.
Well, I suppose so. You see, Doctor, I came to see you because I've gained so much weight recently, and Mother Mary said I should have a full exam, including my cholesterol.
Well, Bruin, please meet my staff. There's Hannah, Ada, Anna, and then there's Eve and Lil and Nan. You know, I studied under Dr. Otto Rotkard, a noted dietitian. I'm sure we can help you.
Oh, wait a minute. I sense a verminal phenomena here. The names you just said are all palindromes. That means they're spelled the same backwards as forward.
Very observant, Bruin. You see, I have an unusual mirror vision, and these palindromes simplify my record keeping.
Oh, I bet it does. Look, now I understand.
Well, let's get your exam started.
Oh, okay, I'll follow you.
All right, Bruin. First of all, let's weigh you. Good Lord, 300 pounds.
300? Is that too much? I mean, how much am a bear supposed to weigh?
I don't know how much bears weigh. Let's look at the rest of you.
Oh, okay.
Come on. First, eyes,
Yeah, I can see pretty good out of them.
ears,
Oh, I hear real well.
teeth, and throat.
Oh,
Now let's listen to your heart and lungs.
do they sing songs? Is it still there?
That's good. Tell me what your diet consists of. How much you eat and when.
Well, I eat lots and lots of nuts and berries. Also honey, if I'm lucky enough to find some. And ants and grubs are good too. Oh, I like those especially. Along with some corn and apples. But recently, I mostly eat nuts. I eat, and then I sleep a little and start eating again. And I like beech nuts, acorns, hickory nuts. I even had some peanuts at the Bonneville Fair. And sometimes I have some of that fast food. I don't mean rabbit. When Claude or Mother Mary take me to one of those drive-up windows, I used to get a dog biscuit too.
Well, you know, I recommend a diet.
What kind of a diet?
Stressed desserts.
You emphasize desserts?
I saw desserts. I'd no lemons, alas. No melon, distressed was I.
And you say to drink plenty of fluids?
Yes, bottoms up. U.S. motto, boy.
Oh. Is there any other way to lose weight?
Yes, you could just stop eating.
Doc, note, I dissent. A fast never prevents a fatness. I diet on cod.
My only other advice is to hibernate.
Why, yes, I do that every year, and it always works. Why didn't I think of that? I guess it's our weight-conscious society that made me think I had a problem. Thanks, Dr. Fox. May I ask you what you do each presidential election?
Why, rise to vote, sir.
Who do you feel has been our greatest president?
Name now one man.
Oh, all right, Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Tut, tut. Star comedy by Democrats. Tut, tut.
Oh, then you're a Republican?
Hey, yay.
You must have a very satisfying job helping people. Thanks again.
Did I do? Oh God, did I as I said I'd do? Good, I did. Revered now I live on. Oh, bid I do no evil, I wonder ever. Are we not drawn onward, we few drawn onward to new era?
Wow, talk about palindromes. Your whole life is a palindrome. Thanks again, Dr. Fox.
You're welcome, Bruin.
Well, I can see where his files come in real handy. Probably easy to read, too.
And we're going to talk today about some pruning it is. And here comes a gentleman right now that's going to be telling us
I don't
about
know
it.
about that. Hi, Ron. How are you?
Hi, Jim. Good to see you.
This is Ron Pembroke, and
Ron.
he's a local arborist. And arbor means, I know arbor means tree.
Yeah.
So arborist must be a treeist, right?
A treeist, yeah.
Yeah?
I think, Claude said we're going to talk about pruning, but I think urban forestry would maybe be a better title.
Okay, because
Yeah.
we are going to get into other things, yeah.
Yeah, but I'd like to talk about here we are in nature, and we can show how what a tree does when it's in nature, how it performs and reacts.
Quite a contrast, isn't it?
It's very different.
Yeah.
The tree really must feel like it's in a different world when someone decides to remove it from here and put it in an urban
Put it
environment.
in a note.
But where we are here, this is reverted. I'm looking at fences and everything, and this was open agricultural land.
As
but
was
it's
most of Vermont.
right. But it's gone reverting back to the forest, and we don't have to look very far around here to see some nice hard maple stems, tall, straight, and they don't need your services here. They're doing it themselves.
No, yeah, the competition for light is the main reason for that. The trees, when they grow in nature like this in a stand, the lack of light, they'll discard those leaves because they're of no use to them.
They're shaded.
They're shaded.
Too
They
far.
can't. Yeah,
And they want some sunlight, which happens to be in that direction, and that's where they're headed.
and that's where they're headed.
So I know a lot of the things that you recommend, Ron, are just to mimic nature. And just like this tree annually gets rid of branches, I can see a branch was there and a branch was there. You see the little flat scars where branches were, that's what you believe in,
Yeah.
doing pruning frequent and often.
Yeah, start early. Start when the
Frequent
trees.
and often mean the same thing, don't they?
Yeah, you want to start early.
Don't put that in there either.
We want to start early. A tree this size would be a good example. If it was a nursery tree, that would be a nice 2-inch caliper size tree to start on. And even hopefully the nursery man has done some of that before you get it. But the thing that is limiting here in this natural environment that the tree has got to deal with in the unnatural urban world is, number one, the light. We're going to expose this tree to a lot more light, and so it's going to behave differently.
And light's a benefit to the tree.
It's a benefit, yeah.
It's like fertilizer.
Yeah, it's
These trees, if they could have their way, would not grow this way.
Yeah, you're right.
Right? They would like to be free from competition. Competition is the adjacent trees. They would rather, they're fighting with each other.
Yeah, they are, but they've evolved to survive this way. And
Well,
the other,
let's see if we can get a shot of what a natural tree looks like. It looks like a pole.
well, yeah.
And it's not a pretty tree. If it was in our eye level looking out our window, it could be a telephone pole, would
Yeah.
look about the same.
No, it's not. Ideally, you would have the branches a lot lower to the ground in an
Well,
urban tree.
In an urban tree, yeah.
Yeah, you'd want the
This artificial spot that we're
Yeah.
going to see.
Yeah, these artificial locations that we're going to go to, we're going to see hopefully how we can have some branches low to the ground, and yet try and keep the tree healthy.
Mimic nature. Again.
Try and mimic nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit different. The other thing that these trees have when they're in a stand that they don't often have in the urban environment is they've got some protection from wind.
From each other, yeah.
Yeah, each other,
They're
the-
mutual supporting.
Yeah, they support one another. So a weak branch or crotch in the woods here might not be a problem because they won't get as much wind. And probably the third thing that right now we've provided it for a tree, but if there was a hazard tree here, we'd be a target. And so you wouldn't want a hazardous situation to develop in an urban area where there's people and personal property.
That's right, or buildings. Something.
Or building,
Yep.
yeah, that can get damaged.
Mm-hmm.
So those three things are three big ones that change, and that affects how people ought to look at their trees in their yards.
Some landowners do pruning in the forest, and they do it for a different reason than you do it.
They do it for lumber value,
for lumber value.
not aesthetic purposes.
That's right. We want clear hardwood lumber. We don't want branches in our main part of the stem, the lower part of the stem. So we in the forest prune for lumber quality. You prune for safety, shape.
Clearance, visibility.
Yeah, balance, fruiting. We're going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, fruiting.
Is that it?
Yeah, aesthetics.
Well, some of the more interesting trees here, if we were to call them that, I can see them on the bank up behind us here, and the crotch trees, some that a stem has died out from damage, and the wind has gotten through. And you see, they're taking care of themselves. They're getting
Pruned off,
and eventually eliminated, and the stronger, more desirable timber tree is going to grow.
Yeah, there's a fourth tree that one side died.
One side's died.
Probably
There's
broke off.
other couple ash up there, crotched ones that are the tops have gone. But also the other thing right here where we're standing, what's growing here now, in another 30, 40 years, probably about 80% of these stems will not be here because they're going to be too crowded. Just again, like growing.
I got a rule of thumb for that. It's for a forest, and we'll call this an even age forest because it's an old field that was abandoned and it grew up, and so these trees are all the same. They're different sizes, but they're all the same age. That for this tree, which is 7 inches in diameter, we'll say, if all the trees for this forest go from 7 to 8 inch trees, 20% of the trees have to die to allow that inch of growth to occur, and go from 8 to 9, another 20%. So when we start out with a forest, we can have easily, if there's 43,000 square feet to an acre, we can easily have 80,000 trees per acre. And that number will always dwindle down until when you get to well, I guess an oldest forest could be when you get to 100 trees per acre.
We don't have to look far to find them. I mean, here they are.
And we're walking on them too.
And we're walking on them. They're laying down. This one, that's all dead too.
Yeah. And this is where the individual's not important, the forest is. And for the forest to survive, these temporary ones are out here and they're trainers and they're pruners. And then they pass on and give room to somebody else.
And when you talk about the urban tree, right here on the edge of this forest, we don't have to look any farther than the edge of the roadside down there.
Right down the roadside.
We're finding them.
Yes.
You can see where the effect that when they're opened up to light,
They take on a different shape.
they take on a different shape.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things whenever there's storm damage around and everybody up and down the edge of the roads around the meadows, their back lawn, oh my goodness, everything's been devastated. Well, those are more of a high-risk tree. There's a lot more surface area to catch wind and snow and ice and everything else.
And a lot of times they'll be leaning out for the light instead of growing up. If they're on the edge, they'll grow out into the field for light instead of straight up through the forest canopy.
Well, let's go see what this unnatural forest, or you call it the urban forest.
The urban forest. The unnatural forest.
Okay.
Let's go.
What man has created.
Right.
We're going to the city of North Bennington.
Look at that crotch over there.
So, Jim, you're going to explain to people how this is a nice tree?
I parked underneath this a lot in the summer. I've always been glad because of the dog. Been in the car, look for shade.
looking for shade, and it's got a nice full canopy on it, and, a lot of leaves, and most people.
And you tell them what's wrong, okay? I'll be the good guy, you can be the bad guy.
Yeah, he's videoing us now, right?
No, he's shooting the station. Okay.
Yeah, he's taping.
Oh yeah, okay, we already said it.
But
Hey, you got that one about the dog and looking for?
Yes.
we
Okay.
we ought to take a closer look, and maybe there's some things that aren't so good about this tree.
Maybe you won't park underneath it after he sees it.
Yeah, let's take a closer look.
Okay.
This is an old scar. Could have possibly been back in '87, you think, Jim?
Yeah, I would think that's about the October 87 snowstorm.
Yeah. That was probably at that time maybe half the tree, or nearly that broke out, split out.
It could even have been more than half.
Might,
It's been
yeah.
the main stem of the tree.
Might have been the main stem back then.
It's not noted for being a very strong tree to begin with.
No, but they will take a lot of abuse, and they're used.
Take the damage and survive it.
Yeah, yep, they'll take the damage and survive it. One of the things you don't like to see is stems that are growing into one another. This point of attachment is going to be a source of decay and branch failure eventually. Up top you have a co-dominant situation that's developed, but it's got snow in there now, so it's tough to say how strong or weak that attachment is. It looks like maybe it's a fairly strong one.
It's got a little bit of a U to it rather than a sharp V.
It doesn't look like it has any included bark, and that one could probably be cabled maybe and made safe for a long time.
So why don't we're gonna show cabling at another spot.
Kevin's got some cable.
Kevin's got some cable.
But on this side of the tree, you can see that too many branches originating at the same point.
And lots of times when moisture gets in there in the winter and then it starts freezing, expanding, and splitting crotches open.
Yeah, that could occur. I don't know. I don't think that's a real big problem. These branches here were probably removed because someone didn't have the foresight to realize that a car or truck was going to be parked here, and this branch, judging by the size of it, was probably out into the parking area, as was this other one that's been removed. And a lot of that is planning and starting early with your pruning, anticipating those sorts of things.
So, as a businessman, would you like to start on a tree like that?
Oh,
that
no.
bad a shape now?
No.
Because all you do is get a ruined reputation when you.
Well, it's not going to be a pretty sight. It's not going to be a pretty sight when you're done. And in the case with this tree, right here, there's probably no reason to take any of these big branches at this time. Or maybe even in the future they aren't interfering. Obviously, a van or camper or UPS truck wouldn't fit underneath this canopy in this parking space, but there's other spaces. If this was right alongside the road, obviously something would have to be done.
Well, trucks prune some trees too that are along the road.
Yeah, a lot of times you'll see, if you look closely,
see that shape of when the leaves are out.
when the leaves are out, but then also you got to understand that when a branch is growing, it's getting lower to the ground. The side of the branch, the bottom side, it's increasing. It's actually getting lower to the branch. So one year, a 12-foot truck might be able to clear a branch, where 2 or 3 years later, you might come back and you'll see a lot of wounding.
Nicholson.
And in that situation, it's only going to get worse.
So road gets paved.
Yeah, the road gets paved and graded.
So a lot of pruning on ornamental trees you're looking at is for the long term. You can make that tree last a lot
longer.
You can get away with anything by doing nothing for a while. But in the long run of things, your concern is when you have that tree and it's really beautiful there, it's still thriving rather than you don't have to do anything
Exactly.
major. You can,
Yeah, and also the training is so easy to do when the tree is young and inexpensive. when a situation like this develops, like that crotch up there, the cabling, $200 or $300 to put a cable in a tree like that, and there's a lot of prudence.
You don't have to do it.
Yeah.
Years before with a handsaw.
Yeah.
Fram has an ad like that, don't they?
Pay me now or pay me later.
Yeah. Pay me a little now or a lot later.
Yeah. Let's go over and look at
Something.
look at what this tree might have been
Yeah.
20 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
20 years ago. This is another tree that most people, if they were to purchase it, I suspect would be very happy with it. It's very full.
Mm-hmm.
You know, judging by the buds on it, it's healthy. The last year's growth.
It's a super tree, nice and full.
Yeah, nice and full, growing.
It's a mirror of that one over there, only we're stepping back 20 years.
Yeah,
right?
maybe 20 years ago, and I think if you look a little closer, you know, you might see some problems that have already developed, and it would be nice to get them taken care of.
Why don't you point out the ones that you'd like to start on. And you couldn't fix this tree in 1 year.
No, you couldn't. It would be nice if you had the opportunity to work on it for several years to get it into shape. But these 3 branches in this area will not survive 25 years without damaging one another as they increase in girth. Being a tree that's close to the sidewalk like this, I would think you'd want to work at getting all the branches off, maybe up to a height of 6 or 7 feet, possibly 8 feet. So ideally, these lower branches should have been removed, and so that the branching starts up 6, 7, 8 feet up, so that when the branches are out over the sidewalk.
Well, wait a minute. You mean to tell me if we don't, aren't these branches going to go up?
Yeah, those branches are going to go up, but they're also going to go out.
No, I mean, if you said you want to get these branches up 6 or 7 feet, if we wait, aren't these branches going to go up?
Oh, you're saying don't the branches, as the tree grows, don't they go up in height?
Yeah.
You think that's a common misconception?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
You really do?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
So the tree we looked at that's got the cable in it, that's pulling the door off the building as it grows up.
Shouldn't it?
Should pull the cable right.
Because when you go in the woods, when somebody puts a fence into a tree 50 years ago,
And we'd have fences
they're way up in the...
Yeah. No, the point is, if you were to put a nail, if you were to put a nail in that tree, whatever elevation you choose, 100 years from now, barring an earthquake or something, it's going to be at the same elevation.
In surveying, last time we put like a railroad spike in and use it as a benchmark for elevation.
But it won't be visible.
Yeah.
Because as the tree expands,
Yeah.
the nail stays in the same place, same elevation, but the tree gets fatter, and the nail will be inside the tree.
Right. Yeah. So those branch attachments are never going to get any higher in the tree.
Right.
The only way to get the canopy up to provide clearance for the sidewalk, or anybody that might even want to use the space under here.
And this is happening. It's kind of a natural thing here because there's no competition around, so it can grow out as a bush.
Yeah. Well, it's actually not happening naturally because man took and planted this here and took it out of its natural environment. If in nature, you know.
Well, that doesn't mean there's no competition.
No
around where
competition.
it is.
It's got too much light.
We've got a couple of maple right across the street there that are the same thing.
Same
You'd never
situation.
see a maple like that in the woods.
Yeah.
No.
But a maple.
All
on
the
your
trees
front
that
lawn, you
we're
can touch
going
the
to
first
talk
tree.
about today are not in a natural environment.
No.
Yep.
And they're not growing the way they evolved over millions of years to have branches. So everything we talk about is completely artificial.
If this had been growing in a cow pasture, it wouldn't have all of these on here now because they would have been nibbled off probably.
Yeah. The cows would have taken the tender shoots off. But we're going to show you some trees that show maybe where the branches should originate, and then also the spacing within the trees. Show you some young trees where to start with. and how to get to a point where you have options down the road.
Okay.
If things should change, if buildings should be built, or roads should be moved, or that sort of thing, we have options that we can work with.
Okay, let's just say one more thing about how trees grow, because this tree is going to get taller, but those things aren't going to get farther from the ground. A tree gets taller from its tips.
Yeah, the tree starts growing at the buds, and then after the leaves are formed, the branches start to swell, and the biggest part of the tree, which ideally is a trunk, but isn't always the case in an urban tree that hasn't been pruned properly from the start. But the trunk wood is the last to form, and that will actually encompass the smaller branch. Once a branch starts to get to be 75% or more in diameter than what the trunk is, then the two start competing, and they don't have that relationship where the trunk is constantly putting wood on over the branch to have a good strong attachment.
Okay.
Should we show it? We got an example of. Should we show that now?
What's that?
Of the cross section?
Oh, the one that was rubbing?
No, that we cut in half to show.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, what I was getting at is there's a bud right here, and if we come back here next year, the branch will be out here,
Yeah.
and out here, and out here, but
Yeah.
this actual point right here will always
Will always be right there at that same spot.
So if we took a branch like this, the location where it joins the stem is always going to stay there.
Right.
But this is going to be a longer and longer lever, and it's easier to peel that off for breakage and everything.
Oh yeah, exactly. The more leverage there is on there, the more likely that crotch is gonna fail.
Yeah.
And,
At one time, this was a bud.
yeah, exactly.
There was a bud there, and now there's a branch there. And if nothing's done, there'll be a longer branch
Yeah.
there.
And in the woods, even though in nature it doesn't exist because they're being pruned off, but if a weak branch like that was in the woods, it'd be less of a problem than it is out here.
Wouldn't live.
Yeah.
But you've got a concern here: sidewalks, roads, houses. You know what? Things falling down.
Right. Yeah. You got targets. People.
Are you going to continue to park next summer underneath that one?
When my dog's in the car and it's 85 degrees, no, I'm still safe there. And it looks nice. It's just too bad. I could have still had shade.
Yeah, you could have still had shade, and that could be
But
specimen tree.
20 years from now, it's going to be gone.
20 years from now, that'll be gone.
And then I won't be able to park in the shade.
And then you got to start over.
Yep.
And
Because you didn't do any training.
because you didn't do any training, you got to start over. And you see that a lot. You see people putting a lot of money into older, big trees. You know, at the end of their
That a clipper could have had.
that a clipper could have taken care of. Exactly. If Mother Nature wanted that tree to be there instead of in the woods, he would have given it legs so it could have walked over there instead of.
Okay, but that's why we got to keep saying this thing. This is God didn't make that tree like that.
No.
He made a forest, and trees grew
Right.
completely different shape, and that's what we're going to start out with, right? Real strong.
But it's not the tree that got there. It's that man got all the way around where the tree is.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another.
He took down the rest of the tree.
Yeah, took down the rest of the trees
Yeah.
and left that one.
We just don't have enough.
But I bet this one was planted. I bet all these were planted.
Oh yeah.
The catalpa was, right?
Yeah. Did you see that? That's your bean tree.
The one with the transformer in it?
No. One next.
It looks like the pod.
Still pod time?
And that's an ornament.
Yeah, I was planted.
But will
It'll-
others be growing around here?
It has a nice flower display.
Yeah. Big white flower.
About June.
Yeah. When it's full leaf, I mean, when everything else done flowering, that'll flower.
Yeah.
Like horse chestnut. Well, it's kind of warm with no wind, isn't it?
We have up in Sandgate some real high concentrations of shad in places.
Shad ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice small tree. There's one that seems to do quite well as a multi-stem,
Some
as a
up
plum.
to 14, 16 inch. I've had a few.
That's excellent, yeah.
Wow.
They're a beautiful tree. Juneberry, they call them, right?
Area.
Well, we've got to measure them, because I think that's bigger than the ones that are on the list.
Up by the Moffett Hollow Cemetery, right up around in there were some.
This is a honey locust here that had some damage previously. It could have been pruned and maybe some of that damage minimized, but actually hard to see with the snow in the crotches. But these don't look like they're bad branch attachments.
That one right there, Ron, I think is a real good example below where that cable is of a U-shaped crotch
A U-shaped crotch.
versus a V, which is a very sharp.
Yeah, a U-shaped crotch. It doesn't have included bark, and a fairly strong attachment. And a cable was put in to
Reduce pressure. on that
reduce
lower.
stress on that crotch down there, which is a good idea. However, the American National Standards Institute, they recommend that that be 2/3
Of the distance.
of the distance from the crotch, so that
Why don't
cable
we
could
just-
stay there, but it should have one higher.
Yeah, at one time that was okay, but
Yeah.
it's not doing anything today. Why don't we just talk about levers like we're talking about? We've got two branches going in different directions, and when the wind blows, they're starting to go like this. And really, when you watch, if this is a V shape, if it's very sharp V shape, and this is like long levers,
Yep.
it's very easy for that to pull apart and break off. And that's what a cabling is trying to, if
Yep.
you didn't get there early enough to prune it, then the cable is the second step where you say, we're going to tie these two levers together so they're going to move as one
Yep.
and take pressure off this joint right here.
And that'll work in for a long time in a sound crotch like that with a U shape. We've got some that we're going to show that are tight crotched, and
That's a V, where I call V and V, it's used.
a V-shaped crotch where the cabling still effective, but you're still going to have some problems.
And that's one of the criteria you use in the woods, selecting what trees to harvest lots of times is, and just how susceptible they're going to be to wind damage.
To
And
breakage, yeah.
If it's one that has those problems, that's the one to remove and
Yeah.
grow the.
It's every day, it's one day closer to falling apart, because it's going to fall apart. You can't maintain that angle.
And many times you'll see a good-sized section of a tree in the woods, and where it's ripped right down, and it's pretty much within a short period of time will completely ruin the rest of the tree.
Yep.
Yeah, that it's a pretty big scar when one tears out.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Yeah.
And when you have crotches like that in a tree, it makes a difference with the species too, as to what would hold it. And a maple probably is a little bit stronger than some. If that were ash, that wouldn't have been there right now. Probably.
Yeah, and I think one of the strongest ones was the elm. The elm could grow like that, and hardly ever seemed to be a problem.
A lot of the forms of the elm were those.
Yeah,
those crotches, weren't they?
and a lot of people now who want the elm to come back, they want it for that reason, for that form. And that's one of the few trees I know of that would actually...
That was a low-maintenance tree when you come to think of it.
Yeah.
You didn't ever have to do anything to it.
Yeah, but if you ever tried to split any elm wood too, you notice that the fiber, the grain of the wood is a little bit different than what a lot of
Actually, that's what we were talking about, because ash is easy to split and easy to split in the woods. I mean, as a tree naturally, easy to fall apart.
But I think some trees almost adapt themselves based on location. I noticed that in lower grown yellow birch, it'll split halfway decent. On the ridge top, that yellow birch is always very stringy, almost impossible to split. You start to split it, and you got to finish cutting it apart with an axe. It's so stringy. And whether that's a way of that it's adapted.